George hurried toward his wigwam after supper. Today had been an exciting day. The visiting Indians treated him with new respect, and after his performance during the initiation ceremony, even the chiefs had taken trouble to seek his friendship. During supper, they told him to sit at the honored place to the right of Big Wolf. But when they had eaten the meal, George noticed braves building a huge bonfire in the arena. Figuring they were preparing for more dancing and storytelling that night, he decided to return to his wigwam. He had grown tired of the beating drums, and he did not enjoy the stories. Now the brave Running Water, a friend of George's, interrupted his thinking. He said something that George did not understand. "What is this you say, my friend?" George asked. "I say that tonight should prove interesting. Don't you agree?" "Interesting? Why interesting?" George said. "I grow weary of the old warriors' tales." "Tales? Why, surely you know that tonight we will hear no tales. Tonight is the night we shall receive our brides." George's eyes flashed angrily. "Why have I not been told of this before?" "I'm sure I do not know. Perhaps Big Wolf wanted to surprise you. Each of the braves who pass the ceremony today shall be given a bride." "But I do not wish a bride," George said. "You're joking, Swift Arrow. We are all anxious to see which of the maidens will be given to us. Considered most beautiful of all is your own sister-in-law. Lucky is the brave who carries her away as his prize." George turned back toward the arena. He knew he would be expected to attend the ceremony. As the crowd gathered, he glanced occasionally at Inwa. He had to agree that she did look lovely, dressed in white doeskin that set off well her proud, dark beauty. She held her head high and kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. Her, her dress was fringed at the bottom and embroidered with colorful beads. Strings of beads had been gathered into the long braids that reached to her hips, and a beaded headband wound around her forehead. Inwa looked unconcerned, but George knew how anxious she must really feel. Did she not want more than anything else to become the squaw of White Rabbit? George hoped fervently that his beautiful young sister might get her wish. Now Big Wolf rose to speak, and the crowd waited respectfully. His voice sounded weak, but he spoke firmly and without hesitation. "Many years ago I took a beautiful young bride, as many of our braves will do tonight. We passed several moons of great happiness, but the time came when an illness carried her away. She went home to the Great Spirit, but not without leaving me a little girl child to comfort me. This child became the light of my life, but I perceived that I needed a son, and the Great Spirit took pity upon me and sent me a son, a fine, strong son, who has become the bravest of the brave, the strongest of the strong. He is the strength of my heart as my body grows weak from sickness." The crowd watched as Big Wolf called for Inwa and Swift Arrow to join him. They took their places, one on each side of the chief. Inwa stood erect, but turned her eyes modestly to the ground. George, on the other hand, folded his arms across his powerful chest and gazed boldly, though respectfully, into the crowd. Big Wolf continued his speech. "What better union could be made than the marriage of my beautiful daughter, left me by my beloved wife, and my strong son, sent me by the Great Spirit? Thus let it be known that at such a season as my daughter Inwa becomes old enough to be taken as a bride, she shall be received by my son Swift Arrow. I feel a perfect trust in him. He has been victor in all contests with other braves, and you saw his great performance in tonight's ceremony. It is with him that I shall leave my trust when I go to the Great Spirit. He shall be your leader, a wise, strong, good leader whom you will love and respect." Then Big Wolf told his son and daughter to take their places side by the fire, and the chief proceeded to announce the betrothal of other braves. But George, feeling confused and unhappy, did not hear anything more. Inwa, too, sat silent and unseeing. "This can't be," George thought. "I must get away from here before Big Wolf dies, or it will be too late. But how?" George knew that if he disappeared, the best warriors would be sent to bring him back, and his disappearance would be considered an act of coward, reason enough for death, according to Indian thinking. "No, I must not act hastily," George told himself. "I must move cautiously, planning everything." A few days later, Inwa asked George to join her for a ride through the woods. It was the first time they had been alone since the night of their betrothal. As soon as they reached the first of the familiar forest paths, Inwa blurted what she had on her mind. "I can tell that you do not want me for your squaw, Swift Arrow." George remained silent for a moment. "You are my sister. It is neither the custom of my people nor of your people for brother to marry sister." "You are right, and only because our father knows that we are not really brother and sister can he do this. Otherwise, the people would not let him. But what father could never understand is that while I love you as a brother, I can never love you as I love White Rabbit. Somehow I must become the squaw of White Rabbit." George felt relieved. Now at least he knew Inwa would not feel hurt that he rejected her for his squaw. "There is only one thing to do, my sister. I must leave this village and return to my people." Inwa let out a little gasp of surprise. "But Swift Arrow, we have talked of this before, and never can we find a way for you to go. I am afraid it is useless, even to hope that you will ever find happiness among your own people." "No, Inwa, that is not true. I believe that my God will some day answer my prayer to him. Many times I pray that he will show me the way to leave here. Now I think that perhaps he's waited until such a time as now, until I'm older and stronger and understand the ways of the forest. I probably could not have survived in the woods if I tried escaping when I was still a child. But now I am a man." Kinwa smiled. "Perhaps you're right. If you still hope, then so will I, and I will try to help you. I just wish there was some other way, for I shall miss you greatly." "There is no other way," George said quietly. In the winter that followed, George became a great help to the chief. Together they considered plans to increase the village's prosperity, and it was George who suggested in council meeting that the squaws be directed to plant larger areas of corn, squash, and beans. George helped Big Wolf in other ways. He dug roots and herbs from under the snow in the forest, and pounded them and mixed them into strong medicines. Given to the chief, the medicines seemed to help him, and by spring he was walking about the village, though not so firmly as he once had. One day that spring, Big Wolf suggested that it was about time for George to marry Inwa. "I feel so much better now that it seems I will live to see my children married after all. The marriage must be soon, before the winter winds bring sickness again. Perhaps if the marriage is soon, I shall even live to see my first grandchild." George felt dismayed at Big Wolf's urgency, but he didn't know what to say. It was Inwa who came to the rescue. "Oh, no, father. I can't marry yet. I'm not wise enough to become the wife of a chief. We must wait until I learn more things from the old women." Big Wolf shook his head angrily. But when Inwa ran to him and knelt at his feet, crying, "Please, father, give me the time I need to become a good wife," he seemed powerless to refuse her. "Very well, we will wait yet a little while." Another year passed. Big Wolf spent the winter in much pain, often feeling cross and impatient. When nature showed signs of spring, he sent for George. "I have set the time for your wedding feast, my son. Your maid still insists on more time, but she does not know her mind. She has had more than enough time to get ready. You shall be married during the next moon." As the news of the marriage spread throughout the village, people began to prepare for the feast. Hunters brought back several young does, and the squaws set to work immediately curing the hides which they would which would be used for Inwa's wedding dress. Only the softest and whitest hides would have this honor. The squaws took equal care in preparing hides for George's clothing. After all, would he not soon become their chief? It seemed that the whole village rejoiced with the good news of the long awaited wedding. Everyone, that is, except the two most concerned. Now that their wedding day drew nearer, Inwa and Swift Arrow grew fearful. Though they were seldom allowed to be alone together, they were quick to take advantage of what opportunities did come. Occasionally they slipped away into the forest, and the village elders pretended not to notice them go. On one such trip, Inwa brought Swift Arrow good news. "White Rabbit gave me information you have long wanted. I told him I wished to know more about my future husband and the life he lived before joining our village. So he set about helping me. He figured that only the old ones of the village would have the information I requested. Yesterday he sat down among some old warriors who were braiding whips. He pretended he wanted to help them with the whips. Then he mentioned the subject of our marriage. Inwa evidently enjoyed telling her story, but George felt impatient. "Well, what did he learn, Inwa? Tell me quickly." Inwa smiled, unperturbed. "Do not be in such a hurry. You must learn patience. Well, when White Rabbit mentioned our marriage, one old brave puffed out his chest and said, 'Ha! I am one of those who found Swift Arrow when he was but a pale-faced papoose.' Then the old man told him all about the raid on your settlement, and how Big Wolf had ordered that a son be found for him. He said that your mother and father were not killed. Your home was not even burned down. They were in a hurry to get away with you two boys, so they had to satisfy themselves with just stealing some things from the house, such as dishes and blankets." George threw his arms around his sister with joy. "Oh, Inwa, never have I heard such good news. Ma and Pa are still alive. But which way? What direction does my home lie? How do I get there?" White Rabbit found that information for me also. "You must go toward the southwest to a place the paleface call Pennsylvania. You will walk 2 moons and cross many rivers before getting there. Then there's a river, a very wide river to cross. Your valley lies just beyond the great river." Did White Rabbit know the name of the river? "Yes, but I do not remember." "Oh, what does it matter? The paleface call it by an Indian name, but I do not remember." Memory came to George's rescue. He knew that White Rabbit had found out the truth, for he remembered now that his homeland had been called Pennsylvania. And he remembered that river, too. It had another river which branched off from it. But what was the name of it? So many years had passed since he had thought with English words and names that he could remember them only with great difficulty. was called sus. Oh well, like you say, and why it doesn't matter. Why's that, Swift Arrow? That's what White Rabbit said. Sesquinaha. Ha, you are very wise, sister, to learn all this in so clever of a manner. Now I leave now I can leave here shortly. Oh, Swift Arrow, I do not want you to go, Inwa cried. Do not feel bad, little sister. We must each continue in our own way of life, and when I go, you will be able to marry White Rabbit. I am certain Big Wolf will choose him as your husband and as village chief. Big Wolf speaks more highly of him than any other of our braves. Swift Arrow, Inwa said, are you still praying to your Great Spirit? Yes, I talk to him all the time. I am sure he will lead me. When George returned to the village, he found Big Wolf waiting in an angry mood. Where have you been? I have need of you now. News came today that the Paleface are moving more and more into our hunting grounds. Soon they will be trying to build their homes in our own village. They must be stopped. The time will soon come when you must lead our people to war. You will use the torch, the arrow, the tomahawk, and even the paleface's own gun. That is the only language they understand. Then Big Wolf must have sensed George's dismay, for he hastened to reassure him. You are a brave Indian now, my son. You must forget that you ever lived among the paleface. They are not worthy of one so strong and courageous as you. The horrible scene of the last day at his father's home now passed before George's eyes. He remembered the Indians streaming out of the doors with blankets and precious dishes. He remembered Robert's terrified screams. Yet, despite the memories, he merely nodded his head in submission to the chief. Not by a flicker of his eyelashes did he reveal his true feelings. George awoke next morning to find Big Wolf greatly disturbed again, but this time over a completely different matter. It seemed that those in charge of providing food for the wedding had overlooked getting a sufficient amount of firewater for all the guests who would be coming from surrounding tribes. Indeed, some of the braves had even drunk up part of the supply that had been on hand in the village. Big Wolf seemed at a loss as to what to do. The wedding would take place in just 2 days. But what was a wedding feast without firewater? George's quick mind seized on this problem as an opportunity to help him escape. He just hoped it would work. Honored father, he said, the place where our firewater is made lies only a half a day's journey from here. Why not send braves to get some? They could be back in our village by tomorrow morning. You think I trust those braves with so much firewater? The coming feast and celebration has put them in such an excited mood that along the way they would no doubt drink half of what they brought. This is what George had hoped Big Wolf would say. Then there's no answer but that you go with them to make sure nobody touches the firewater, George said. You have felt so much better the past few weeks that you will enjoy the trip, and the exercise will do your body good. Big Wolf considered for a few moments. Yes, I believe you have the right idea, he said. I will go, gather 30 of our most faithful braves, and choose 50 of our strongest horses. It will take at least that many horses to carry the firewater we need. George did as the chief commanded him. Within an hour, the horses were ready and the men were eager to leave. Before Big Wolf mounted his horse, he called to George. Swift Arrow, I leave you in full charge of this village while I'm gone. Big Wolf said in a voice loud enough to be heard by the people who had gathered to say goodbye, in case an emergency comes, you will use your wisdom and counsel with the elders to make a decision. Then Big Wolf placed his hand on George's big shoulder and, lowering his voice, said, I will see you tomorrow, my son, and then we will have more than enough firewater for your wedding. George tried to smile, but had difficulty. No, my father, he thought, you will not see me tomorrow, and the firewater shall not be for my wedding, but for the wedding of my good friend, White Rabbit. It is he who will marry Inwa. Watching the chief ride off in the morning sunlight, George felt sad. He had endured Big Wolf's stern punishments, but he had also enjoyed his many kindnesses. As the years passed, George had grown to love the man. But now I must leave, he thought. It will be best for all. I could not make a good leader for these people, for I would never lead them to battle when they thought it necessary. I would never stand by and let them hurt one single hair from the head of my people. George ran to Inwa's wigwam. Inwa, Inwa, he called. The old squaw stuck her head through the wigwam opening and pretended to be angry when she saw it was George. Go away, young chief, she said. You are not to see your bride when the wedding time is so close. George sighed. Do not be foolish, old one. I have grown up with her, and I will see her if I want to. Now tell her to come to me. The squaw's head disappeared back inside the wigwam, and Inwa emerged a short time later. She looked worried. The time draws near, Swift Arrow. What do we do? Shh. Do not speak so loudly, my sister. Today is the day I leave. I have a plan, and when I am ready, I will let you know. Then we will go for a ride together. Bring a supply of jerked venison with you. Stay close to your wigwam so I can reach you easily. George walked toward the shelter where he knew he would find what remains of the village's supply of firewater. Along the way, he told several men to follow him. Help me take this firewater to the arena, he told them. Then, pointing to one warrior, he said, and you call the braves together and direct them to meet me at the arena. When George and his helpers reached the arena with the caskets full of liquor, the other braves were already waiting. My friends, George said, you have worked hard preparing for my wedding feast. A little fun will do you good. Since a new supply of firewater arrives tomorrow, shall we not finish off what we have here? The men cheered their agreement and fell to drinking with a will. Before long, they were drunkenly approving the new chief. George returned to the arena an hour later and found the casks empty and several braves scattered on the ground sleeping. In the village, he found more braves dozing in the sun by their wigwams. A few who had not yet had their fill laughed foolishly as he walked by. Now is the time, George thought. The braves are too drunk to know what I do, and the squaws are not wise enough to care. It will be evening before they know I am missing, and even then most will probably be too sick from firewater to chase after me. He hurried to his wigwam and gathered some things he would need. A light blanket, a small flask to hold water, and his bow and arrows. When I am unlucky with my bow, I will eat venison that Inwa brings, or plants and berries from the forest. He found Inwa waiting beside her wigwam, and she followed him to the horse corral without a word. Reaching the corral, George had an afterthought. Perhaps you had better not go any farther, Inwa. The people will want to know why you did not stop me. Then you are really leaving now? I'm sad. No, I will go with you as far as I dare, just as though we were taking one of our usual rides. I will tell the people that I stopped to rest or watch some animals play. When I returned to the path, you were gone. After riding about 3 hours, George told Inwa to return. You must go back, little sister, so darkness does not catch you in the forest. I could not go in peace if I had to fear for your safety. Inwa turned toward him, and her eyes filled with tears. He had never seen her look more beautiful. Do not cry, Inwa. I will find happiness among my people, and you will be happy with White Rabbit. When Inwa did not move or say anything, George felt like weeping too. How could he leave this lovely creature who had for so long been both a friend and a sister? My heart will be with you and your father always, sister. But go now. You must return. Inwa seemed unable to speak, but she touched her hands to her lips and reached it to his cheek, then turned and slowly rode back down the trail, her head bent in sorrow. Now George jumped from Nico and turned the little pony loose with a slap on the rump. Goodbye. You have been a good, faithful friend, he said. George knew that the pony would find his way back to the village. He could not use it any more, for now he must leave the trails and travel through the bushes and trees. If he should stay on the trail, his tracks would be easy to follow. He watched Nico and Inwa until they disappeared. Then he plunged into the thick undergrowth.